Since the start of 2020, the one activity that seems to give me the most mental clarity is walking. As someone with pretty serious anxiety triggered by just about anything these days, walking has been the one thing throughout these past couple of years of chaos that's kept me from completely just losing my absolute goddamn mind. Holy fuck! Anyway, why is it then that video games so regularly make walking feel like an afterthought? A tedious tool to get from point A to point B, something you try to avoid. But does walking in video games have to be boring? Before we get into the video essay, I just wanted to jump in here and remind you to subscribe and like the video for more content like this every single month. It's free and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. Every step that we take as human beings is a web of complex movements and corrections and unseen calculations. So when games simplify all of that to pushing forward on a joystick, it kind of makes us forget just how difficult the journey down a mountainside would actually be. Of course, I don't want all games to overcomplicate moving in a straight line. That wouldn't be very fun in a power fantasy like Skyrim. But when each step is meaningful, and the journey to scale a mountain is difficult, it brings back into focus how engaging even the most minuscule thing can be when developers get creative, and how unengaging those things can be when we settle for the mediocre. In basically every game I've ever played that asks me to inhabit a moving character, walking is a requirement at some point. It's just a necessity of getting around. And it's often really boring. The most tedious part of a game. Something we can't help but take for granted. Insomniac knew this and made walking the most cumbersome and frustrating way to move around New York as Spider-Man. This incentivizes the player to get off the streets and interact with the much more exciting traversal systems unique to Spider-Man. Web swinging is smoother and a lot faster than going anywhere on foot, no matter what part of Manhattan you're in. This game made movement so fun that I've never actually used the fast travel feature. In fact, I forgot that existed until writing this script. Maneuvering above the rooftops and weaving through skyscrapers is just too fun. Why walk through Red Dead Redemption 2 when you could be on horseback, you know? Much more convenient. Plus, hoofing it would mean you're missing out on so many groundbreaking features, like horse testicle physics. The way we move as a character throughout a video game often dictates how immersed we feel in a game world, even though we may not consciously realize that. So the fact that so many titles make you dread moving around because of tedious walking is really a shame. It feels like a missed opportunity. This necessity clearly doesn't have to be boring though. Mirror's Edge and Ghostrunner make traversing by foot a heart-pounding experience. But walking across larger and larger game worlds can be a slog. So grating that even the developers know it, incorporating fast travel a lot of the time as a band-aid instead of finding a solution to the actual problem. And that leaves you with open worlds so sprawling, you're only going to want to use fast travel to get anywhere because of how arduous the trek is going to be. But what happens when you take away that crutch of fast travel and force a developer to make a sprawling game world without it as a fallback? You get problem solving and creativity. You get the single most interesting game that has made walking into its core feature. You get Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding. And Kojima seemingly knew how important this core mechanic of walking was because the game didn't just double down on it. It tripled or even quadrupled down. Now there is fast travel in the game, but most of the game's main missions don't allow you to use it as a way to bypass overworld traversal to complete your tasks. Walking and traversal is like the entire gameplay loop, save for some sections that, honestly, feel a little out of place if you ask me. While out in the wilderness of the post-apocalyptic United States, you're not just pushing your thumbstick forward for 20 minutes at a time. You're planning your routes beforehand, you're scanning the terrain around you for uneven surfaces, You're rebalancing to make sure your parcels remain undamaged. Every moment is a potential tumble down a rocky mountainside if you're not paying attention. In opposition to most other games that set you loose on expansive maps, you can't go anywhere and do anything. You're limited to where you could realistically maintain balance with all of these packages strapped to your body. And that's what makes the game so compelling and different. It's not an open world power fantasy. The unforgiving terrain you traverse as Samuel Porter Bridges is the main antagonist here. You're constantly made to feel feeble in the shadow of monstrous mountains and rapidly flowing rivers. In fact, when I was first playing, I was using the scanner every few steps to analyze the terrain around me because I was so intimidated. I don't think any other game has forced me to pay this much attention to the surfaces around me before. It's like every journey was through a minefield of potential hazards. My brain was constantly thinking about the next step, and the step after that, and the one after that, until it had been 20 minutes and my journey was finished. Sure, there are mules and BTs and Mads Mikkelsen, but you'll be spending most of the game looking for ways to overcome the world around you, which seems to have it out for you at every turn. The landscape is your enemy, and each step you take is the combat. Well, there's also actual combat, but to be honest, that's where the game fell short for me. I'm sure that some of these sections were thrown in at the request of publishers since they don't really line up with the design philosophy that the rest of the game seems to be going for. Call of Duty bunker shootouts don't really feel like they belong here at all. And personally, I've never really found Kojima's character writing or plot handling very compelling. I know that's just a personal preference, but hey, this is my video essay, so. When I'm being talked at by Die Hardman and Amelie America Strand, I just can't take any of it seriously. I'm sorry. I love a bit of camp in my video games, but like, too much for me. And when I'm thrown into half-hour-long cutscenes, there have to be more engaging ways to present these parts of the narrative. Story aside though, it's those moments out in the wilderness that made Death Stranding such a success for me. Those moments where you're alone with Norman Reedus and a breathtaking view. It's interesting how much the tedium of some of these exposition dumps actually made me look forward to the walking even more. Very much the reverse of most other video games that I've played. I wonder if that was part of the design? Damn, Kojima, I see you. I've never gotten quite that close to the feeling of going on a walk to clear my head within a game world as I did with Death Stranding. The reception upon release was pretty mixed though, which confused me at first. This game that I was introduced to at the start of 2020 about human connection and hope amidst isolation was being called boring and uninspired? Did I miss something? Like Black Licorice though, some people absolutely loved it, and others thought the game was entirely vile. But after the decade that introduced the walking simulator genre, which caused an uproar by daring to exist in the first place, are we really at all shocked that so many AAA gamers missed the point? Because at the end of the day, that is what the most successful parts of Death Stranding are. A AAA walking simulator. This genre that started on the indie market has always gotten unfair criticism. From being a glorified book to not being mechanically complex enough, the walking simulator's name even came out of negativity. A term first coined as an insult to quote-unquote non-games like Dear Esther has now been reclaimed by developers and turned into one of the most interesting genres out there. But if the walking simulator really sticks the landing, the sense of immersion is unparalleled, and it can sometimes transcend the limits of how we think about video games in the first place. What's the first thing you do when you load into a first-person game? If you're anything like me, you look down to your character's feet to see if they're even there. If you've never done this, A, you're lying, and B, you might not realize how many games don't bother animating your character's feet. It does add complication to the coding process, but it adds a lot to your immersion in a first-person game, where that's kind of the whole point. And if you look down and it turns out you're just a pair of floating eyeballs and a couple of hands, how are you ever going to feel like the Dragonborn? One of the fastest ways to lose a player's suspension of disbelief in a video game is to make a walking animation that trips over its own 2 feet. There's so many little things that can break the illusion. Footfalls not matching up with the speed of the character's animation, soles not meeting up with the ground and not giving the player a sense of traction, foot skating. All of these microscopic details take tons of fine-tuning and time, but without them, games give away their artificiality in an instant. It's maybe one of the hardest things to get right in video game animation. Apart from doors, apparently. Is that going to be my next hyper niche video essay? Stay tuned, I guess. Not to mention making a character's walking animation feel like it matches controller inputs. Sluggish movement or over-responsive steps remind you that you're playing a video game, as opposed to embodying a character, walking in their shoes. And even big-budget AAA releases can get taken out at the ankles here. Making controller inputs feel responsive can obviously be a struggle, but if the building blocks of movement don't feel right, then the game is fighting an uphill battle to win a player back. It's one of the main pillars of interaction with a game after all. Something like animating a 3D character's turning animation while also making it feel responsive is actually a colossal task. But when done right, immersion boner right there, you know? There's no real shortcuts to this either. Even things like motion capture that you might think would make things feel realistic without question can just sort of feel static? It creates this uncanny valley effect with the way a character's movement looks on screen. So, ironically, rotoscoping and motion capture, processes where the source material is real human movement, oh boy. Even with great mocap implementation, animators need to do a lot of work to make those captured frames into something expressive and usable. There's a reason most animators' first order of business is to nail down a character's walking cycle. In most games, the player will be doing a lot of walking, and it's a pretty expressive form of characterization too. Even the rhythm of a step and catch can tell us how a character's feeling, how they interact with the world, or how they want the world to see them. Now that video game technology has advanced and let us achieve some amazing feats immersion-wise, gamers' brains have become more demanding than ever for a realistic walk to transport them into the world of a game. Back before the advent of 3D graphics though, most walking cycles only needed 3 or 4 frames to convey fluid movement. A head bob, an arm swing, and moving feet. That's all it took. But nowadays, we've seen so many different styles of expressive movement, and there are so many more details required to making a walk readable, not to mention engaging. These days, character movement is so much more than just a walk cycle. Video game development in general needs to be much more innovative to stand out. Games have included different types of walking that can affect the gameplay. Crouching, crawling, carrying a hog-tied criminal on your shoulders. Different types of walking depending on how burdensome your inventory is. We've made some big steps in the way characters are able to move. It's definitely gotten a lot more interesting. The repetitive loops of a left step, right step, right step are no fun to watch over and over, especially now that game worlds are getting so damn big. A little too big in some cases. But plenty of creative indie games are stepping up to the plate when it comes to proving that walking can be an interesting mechanic in the right hands. Every step in Superhot comes with the consequence of moving time forward, forcing each step you take to matter. The Pathless found a way to make walking across a large open field a matter of timing, reminiscent of a rhythm game. Speaking of, Crypt of the Necrodancer has literally made the process of walking anywhere into a rhythm game mechanic. Indie dev teams like Giant Squid make every game with the intention to innovate in areas where previous games have taken mechanics for granted. They've proven that swimming in a 3D underwater environment doesn't have to be frustrating, and that walking through large open worlds doesn't have to be tedious. Giant Squid knows how to make movement the most exciting part of a game. Instead of movement in the Pathless, for example, boiling down to holding a joystick forward, the devs wanted to make the player feel like a fast and acrobatic archer of legend. But to maintain mobility and accessibility, Giant Squid incorporated floating gems that the archer launches arrows at in order to maintain momentum. While this sounds a little clunky on paper, it works out to be a great way to keep even the most basic stroll interesting. Because the aiming is automatic, the focus isn't on moving a reticle around with each shot. That would be incredibly annoying. But instead, the timing of the button presses is where the player's point of interaction is. It introduces just enough challenge to force you to pay attention, while not adding too much to make things frustrating. Think Insomniac's Spider-Man's web slinging, but with a bow. And when you're keyed into that rhythm, it feels just as satisfying. Quite honestly, it's the best thing about the Pathless. Similarly to Abzu, I could spend an entire evening just moving around with no goalposts in sight and be perfectly satiated. That's a pretty good sign that a game has perfected its overworld movement. As someone whose motivation to play games usually lies in extrinsic motivators like leveling or moving the story forward, it says a lot that games like these are most engaging to me when I'm just sauntering around the game world. Intrinsically wanting to become better at the movement mechanics, just because it clicks with me so well. So whether a game is revolutionizing the way we walk in a video game by just making us not take it for granted, or by asking us to shoot gems to maintain our running speed, I think a lot of recent titles are proving that walking in video games isn't actually boring. It can be the most exciting thing about a game, especially when developers are willing to take some risks and get creative. I mean, there's a reason that the walking simulator is a thriving genre to this day. Walking, whether we're talking about real life or video games, can be a great way to reflect and unwind. After a heart-pounding boss battle or earth-shattering plot revelation, taking a walk lets us digest what we just went through with our main character. It's those moments that I feel like I'm one with a character rather than the action-packed chase sequences. Even if mechanically, it's just hiding a load screen half the time. Similarly to my first video essay that I put out exactly 1 year ago now, I think my point with this hyper-specific and niche video topic is to draw attention to how much work and effort goes into every detail of the video games we play. Even when games fumble here and there, it's pretty incredible that they exist at all. Little ones and zeros and lines of code can transform into a game that makes us feel like we're scaling treacherous peaks, and button presses give us the power to slay gods. That feeling of immersion is such a tricky thing for games to get right, but when they do, nailing the mechanics of walking is often the first step. Hey there! Thank you so much for watching the video essay, I really appreciate it. I just wanted to say a huge heartfelt thank you to everybody who has supported these videos over the past year. I've been putting out video essays on the first Saturday of every month for 12 months straight now, which is kind of a lot. And it's been a ton of work to keep up that uploading schedule and stream 4 days a week and have a day job and yeah. But it's also been so rewarding to see all of the positive feedback on all of these videos over the past year. It's kind of mind-blowing. Thank you for all the retweets. Thank you for all the likes and comments. Thank you for sharing these videos. And thank you for getting me past the 1,000 subscriber mark within a year of making these. That's crazy. And speaking of helping out, thank you so much to my monthly supporters over on my Ko-fi page. Voxamandius, Puzzled Monkey Tree, Mumpow, Oyster Milk, Dear Papaya, Nightmare God, Bean Fiello, Alien, Damn Amazin', Veltwalker, and a Werewolf. It's monthly supporters like these lovely folks that help make these videos possible. And if you want to help make future content even better, you can become a monthly supporter for as little as $4 a month. You'll get shoutouts at the end here, bonus content throughout the month, and behind-the-scenes sneak peeks at future videos. Also, if you want to check out any of the games that I've listed in any of my videos, you can always check the description. There's affiliate links to download most of these games down below, and doing so supports the channel while also helping out a charity at no extra cost to you. It's a win-win-win. Plus, there's some pretty good sales down there right now, so I would check it out if I were you. Anyway, thank you again for making this first year of video essays incredible. I can't say thank you enough. So I guess I'll just see you in the next one. Bye!